Hello, my name is Jessica, and I am 35 years old. From the outside, my life must seem like a perfectly constructed career ladder, the pinnacle of which I occupy as the deputy CEO of a reputable sports nutrition company. However, for most of my relatives and acquaintances, this perfection proves to be illusory as soon as the topic of my personal life comes up. With genuine and sometimes deliberate concern, they pester me about why I am still unmarried, as if this fact concealed some flaw that devalues all my other achievements. The truth, however, is as simple as an exhale. I don't need a serious relationship at the moment. My life is already full and self-sufficient. My younger brother, Jake, who recently turned 28, married Sarah, his longtime girlfriend, last year. Their union, which had been brewing for many years, logically and smoothly transitioned into marriage, which surprised no one. I felt a sincere, pure joy for them, and as a wedding gift, presented them with a check for $15,000. For me, that sum is by no means small, even considering my more than decent salary. But Jake is my flesh and blood, my brother, and I wanted to help them start their new family life on a solid foundation. Isn't that the essence of family? The wedding itself was a day of refined beauty and happiness. Sarah in her wedding dress looked like a fragile porcelain figurine, and Jake wore a radiant, slightly foolish grin of absolute bliss on his face the entire time. The ceremony took place under the vaults of the old church our family had attended forever, and the lavish reception was held at a fancy hotel in the heart of the city. Everything was flawless, until the old family demons reared their heads at the celebration. "So, Jessica, when are you finally going to settle down?" my Aunt Linda hissed, approaching me with a glass of champagne right in the middle of the banquet. "You're now the only unmarried one in our entire large family," Aunt Karen immediately chimed in, like a second fiddle in an inept orchestra. As if I weren't aware of that statistic myself. Mom didn't miss her chance to put in her 2 cents, sighing wistfully, "It's about time we heard the pitter-patter of little feet in your big house." I smiled and nodded, a gesture perfected to the point of automation, feeling irritation simmer beneath the mask of friendliness. Inwardly, I was pleading with the heavens for the strength to endure this ritual without snapping. These people act as if loneliness is a contagious disease, an ailment requiring urgent treatment. Yet I have a brilliant career, my own home, and I am genuinely happy. What more do they want? After the wedding, Jake and Sarah moved into a studio apartment that belonged to our parents. The apartment is small but quite cozy, and its main advantage is the lack of rent. Our parents essentially gifted it to them. Mom asked me to take care of their utility bills, and for several months now, I have been faithfully covering their electricity and gas payments. I don't mind helping family, but sometimes a worm of doubt stirs within me. Do they appreciate this help, or do they take it for granted? The first months of their married life were quite cloudless. Sarah seemed sweet and invariably polite, especially during our Sunday dinners at our parents' house. She always thanked me for helping with the bills, asked about my work, and I had the impression that we understood each other completely. I had worked long and hard to achieve my career position. Starting work at 16, I pushed my way through college and 13 years of meticulous climbing up the corporate ladder at my company. 3 years ago, I finally took the seat of deputy CEO. My salary became more than decent. 2 years ago, it allowed me to buy my own house. It's big, very comfortable, with 4 bedrooms, a spacious living room, a great kitchen, and a well-kept backyard. I invested not only money but also a piece of my soul into it, earning every square meter through honest labor. The search for the perfect house took me many months. I scoured dozens of options, inside and out, until I found this one, in a prestigious, quiet neighborhood, not far from work, the one I had always dreamed of. On the day I signed the purchase agreement, I felt an incomparable, dizzying feeling, a sense of an accomplished goal. This was my house, bought with my money, my inviolable sanctuary that no one could take from me. I gave my parents a spare key right after moving in. They helped me arrange the furniture, and at the time, this decision seemed natural. Let them have a key for emergencies. After all, they are my parents. I trusted them implicitly. The tradition of Sunday family dinners at our parents' house has been alive since Jake and I were little children. We sit around the same large wooden table where we used to have breakfast before school. Mom cooks her signature roast or baked chicken with herbs, and we leisurely share news from the past week. It's usually a warm, heartfelt time. But lately, I've noticed alarming changes. Sarah began allowing herself small, barely perceptible comments during these meals. Nothing overt, just subtle, seemingly offhand hints. She might mention how cramped they are in their studio, or how great it must be to have so much free space at one's disposal. She never mentioned my name directly, but everyone at the table understood perfectly well who and what she was talking about. "It's just so unfair," she said last Sunday, elegantly cutting a chicken leg with her knife. "Single people own such huge houses, while young families, who will soon have to raise children, are crammed into tiny little cages." My parents just nodded in agreement, as if her words contained some undeniable worldly wisdom. I pretended not to catch the subtext, but I understood perfectly well what was happening. She was playing her quiet, persistent game, and I decidedly did not like where it was heading. The thing is, I never considered their dwelling shabby or unworthy. Sure, the space was limited, but it granted them the priceless gift of freedom from rent and mortgage burdens. I was covering the utility bills, so their combined monthly expenses were close to zero. Most young couples in their place would be overjoyed by such a financial utopia. But Sarah acted as if they were languishing in a basement, not in a cozy, bright studio in a decent neighborhood. At first, I tried to ignore her barbed remarks, attributing it to complex family dynamics and not wanting to fan the flames of conflict. However, the hints didn't stop. On the contrary, with each new Sunday dinner, they became less veiled, more brazen. Sarah would frequently sigh heavily, casting a wistful glance around their little nest, or make remarks about how many opportunities for hobbies and solitude there must be in my spacious house. Jake gradually joined this chorus. He began mentioning in passing that he and Sarah were thinking about children, and that children, supposedly, need space to play and develop. At the same time, he would look intently at me, and his eyes held a silent expectation, as if I were supposed to immediately react to this transparent hint. But I knew the true value of my house. I had suffered for every brick, and I had not the slightest intention of feeling guilty for what I had, thanks to my own labor. The most painful part of this situation was my parents' reaction. They just meekly nodded and agreed with every word Sarah said, as if hypnotized. Their behavior made it unmistakably clear that I was selfish simply by virtue of existing within the walls of my own home, as if they had completely forgotten that all these years I had been a reliable financial support for them. I faithfully covered Jake's utility bills. I gave them a substantial sum for the wedding. I had lent my parents money more than once when they found themselves in a difficult situation. And yet, it was I who was labeled the selfish owner, unwilling to part with a house I could only afford after 13 years of continuous, exhausting work. There was no logic to it, but apparently, no one cared. 3 months after these verbal games began, I noticed something strange as soon as I crossed the threshold of my parents' house for another Sunday dinner. The atmosphere was charged with hidden tension. Everyone was behaving unnaturally, strained. My parents kept exchanging meaningful, quick glances with Jake and Sarah, full of some secret knowledge. Sarah couldn't hide a radiant, triumphant smile that stretched her lips into an unusually wide grin, threatening to spill out into a loud announcement at any moment. And Jake, with a new, touching tenderness, kept touching her stomach, a gesture that conveyed both affection and protection. I wasn't stupid. The picture was coming together with frightening clarity. Sarah is pregnant raced through my mind as I watched this silent scene. They're going to announce it at the table. And, to my own surprise, I felt a sincere, warm joy for them. Jake had always adored children, and Sarah, undoubtedly, could be a wonderful mother. The arrival of a child would be a blessing for the whole family. Perhaps it would even distract everyone from the persistent inquiries about my single status, giving them a new, much more fruitful topic for discussion. We sat down at the table, laden with Mom's famous roast, its aroma tickling our nostrils, promising gastronomic pleasure. But as soon as we picked up our cutlery, Jake cleared his throat solemnly, calling for attention. "Sarah and I have some news we want to share," he said, squeezing her hand. "We're having a baby." My parents immediately burst into happy tears, though their feigned surprise couldn't hide the obvious. They had known from the very beginning. Mom jumped up to hug Sarah, and Dad proudly shook Jake's hand, as if he had just won a great victory. "Congratulations," I said, and there wasn't a hint of falseness in my words. "I'm truly happy for you. This is wonderful news." But then Mom, beaming, tactlessly added her remark. "Well, at least one of my children will give me grandchildren," she said, looking straight at me. I was beginning to think I'd never see this day. I gritted my teeth, feeling the color rise in my cheeks. This evening rightfully belonged to Jake and Sarah, and I had no intention of spoiling it with a confrontation. I just kept a smile on my face and congratulated the future parents once more. Then Sarah turned to me, and her smile, always so sweet and ingratiating, now seemed openly triumphant. "Actually, Jessica, I've been talking to Jake and your parents about something very important," she began, and her voice, usually quiet, now sounded authoritative and confident. "It's about our housing situation. We've all come to a unanimous opinion that the housing within our family is distributed in an extremely unfair way." I stopped chewing, feeling a piece of roast get stuck in my throat. "In what sense?" I forced out, looking around the table. Jake and my parents were nodding in agreement, as if Sarah were uttering an undeniable truth beyond doubt. "You live alone in your huge house, where rooms stand empty and go to waste," she continued, looking at me with unconcealed reproach. "And we are crammed into a tiny studio, and soon we will have a child who will vitally need its own space." "Okay," I said slowly, feeling a cold wave of anger rising. "And how does that concern me?" At that moment, Mom intervened, and her voice held notes of strained exhortation. "Jessica, now you need to act like a true sister. You must prove your love for your brother and his future child." "And how exactly do you think I should do that?" I asked, although a terrible guess was already tightening like an icy ring around my heart. "You should simply give your house to Jake and Sarah," Mom said, with such simplicity, as if offering to pass them the salt shaker. "They need that space more than you do." I stared at her, not believing my own ears. "Are you serious right now?" "Absolutely serious," my father supported her, looking at me with a stern gaze for the first time that evening. "You will move into the studio where Jake and Sarah currently live. We are even prepared to formalize everything. You transfer the deed of your house to Jake, and we transfer the deed of the studio to you." My gaze slid over the faces sitting at the table. There wasn't a trace of doubt or awkwardness on them. They were absolutely serious. They sincerely believed they were offering the fairest solution. "No," my voice sounded, sharp and alien, before I even realized it. I stood up from my chair, pushing it back with a scrape. "Absolutely not. I am not giving up my house." "Jessica," Mom's voice became hard and lecturing, "don't be so selfish." "Selfish?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My temples were pounding. "I spent 13 years of my life to be able to afford this house. I saved every penny, denying myself everything. I earned it." "You're just an old maid who will never get married or have children anyway," my father said with icy contempt. "Why do you even need such a big house?" His words hit me with a crushing blow, more painful than any slap. My own father called me an old maid. And then Jake joined the conversation, his voice ringing with open reproach. "You're just greedy, Jessica, and family should help family." "Greedy?" I laughed, but it was a bitter, dry, hysterical laugh. "I gave you $15,000 for your wedding. I faithfully pay for your utilities every month. Tell me, Jake, in what way exactly am I greedy?" "That's completely different," he tried to parry, but his voice trembled. "No, it's not different," I retorted, feeling tears welling up in my throat but forcefully pushing them back. "I'm tired of you all acting like the problem is with me. I'm tired of you always having loved Jake more than me." "That's not true," Mom exclaimed, but there wasn't a trace of conviction in her voice, only guilty confusion. "No," I exhaled and my gaze became firm. "Then here is my solution. Sell your studio. Use that money as a down payment and buy a house for Jake and Sarah. Problem solved. My parents looked at each other in confusion. "We can't afford a second mortgage," my father muttered, lowering his eyes. "Then live within your means," I snapped, grabbing my purse from the chair with force. "And don't you dare dream of taking my house just because you don't want to spend your own money." I resolutely headed for the exit, but they weren't about to let me go so easily. "Jessica, you're acting absolutely ridiculous," Mom shouted after me, and her voice rang with a genuine fury I rarely heard. "Selfish," my father cut in, putting all the accumulated parental authority of years into that word. "Greedy," Jake's voice sounded, almost screeching. I froze right at the door, turning around to take one last look at this astounding picture. My own family, lined up against me in a united front. "This conversation is over," I said with an icy calm I didn't know I possessed. "I am not giving up my house. Period." I slammed the door, cutting myself off from their condemning gazes, and drove away to my quiet, safe refuge. When I crossed the threshold of my house, I was overcome by a strange, almost mystical sense of belonging. I slowly looked around the spacious living room, the comfortable sofa I had saved up for months, the elegant coffee table brought back from a trip to Italy, the solid oak kitchen table where I drink coffee every morning, looking out into the garden. This wasn't just a dwelling. It was a fortress, erected through years of labor and deprivation. Every centimeter of these walls was imbued with my will, my ambitions, my victory over circumstances. And I would be damned if I let people who thought I didn't deserve that right take it from me. Let them call me selfish. Let them brand me an old maid or a greedy miser. Their words no longer had power over my mind. This house was mine, and I was ready to defend it to the end. I brewed myself a cup of oolong tea and settled into my favorite armchair by the panoramic window, looking out at the moonlit backyard. For the first time in recent months, filled with burdensome hints and silent tension, I felt not just relief, but a deep, all-encompassing calm. I had said no. The world hadn't turned upside down. The sky hadn't fallen. On the contrary, an unfamiliar silence had settled in my soul. The next morning, the phone rang exactly at 7. Mom's name was on the screen. I didn't pick up. Then Dad called, then Jake, then Sarah. I ignored all the calls, calmly got ready, and left for the office. By lunchtime, my missed call counter was at 12, and there were about 20 messages in my mailbox. I finally opened them while having lunch in the corporate cafeteria. "Jessica, we need to discuss this like adults. Your behavior is reckless." That was from Mom. "Your brother needs the family's support. Remember, family always comes first." Dad. "Sarah cried all night because of your cruelty. You're causing unbearable stress to a pregnant woman." Jake. "I truly thought of you as a sister. Apparently, I was deeply mistaken." Sarah. "I deleted each message, one after another, without dignifying them with a response. Their tactic was transparent. They were trying to burden me with guilt, but I was no longer going to participate in this sophisticated psychological game." The calls didn't stop for the next 3 days. Every vibration of the phone was another attempt to break my will. They left several voicemails, each more dramatic than the last. "Jessica, it's Mom. With your unforgivable selfishness, you are tearing our family apart." "Jessica, it's Dad. I am incredibly disappointed in you. We raised you differently." "Jessica, it's Jake. Because of the stress you've caused her, Sarah is having problems. If anything happens to the baby, it will be on your conscience." It was the last message that made me shudder with cold fury. Now they were trying to hold me responsible for potential pregnancy complications, as if my refusal to part with my own house could somehow mystically cause a miscarriage. It was so absurd, so cynical and manipulative, that all other grievances paled in comparison to this monstrous accusation. I couldn't take it and showed the messages to my colleague and friend Lisa. We had worked together for 8 years, and during that time, she had become an unwitting witness to all the twists and turns of my difficult relationship with my family. "Are they serious?" she exclaimed, scanning Jake's message about the pregnancy. "They're actually trying to manipulate you using the baby?" "Apparently so," I replied with a bitter smirk. Apparently, with my refusal, I am single-handedly jeopardizing Sarah's and my future nephew's well-being. This is pure insanity, Lisa shook her head. You do understand that this is absolutely not your fault, right? I know, I nodded, feeling her support bring almost physical relief. But it was incredibly nice to hear it from someone on the outside. They just want me to feel so awful that I break down and agree. Don't you dare give in, Lisa said firmly, looking me straight in the eyes. You worked like hell for this house. They have no right to it whatsoever. Over the course of the week, the stream of messages became more sophisticated. My relatives started bombarding me with articles about family loyalty and the sacred duty of helping one's neighbor. Mom sent me an excerpt from the Bible, quoting the commandment about loving one's neighbor. Dad forwarded a touching story about a woman who sacrificed her home for her sister. That could be you, his caption read. You could be the hero of this story. I couldn't hold back a loud, almost hysterical laugh. A hero? They wanted me to be a hero by voluntarily giving up everything I had built with such difficulty. There was nothing heroic about it, just blatant, hopeless stupidity. But the heaviest messages were from Sarah. She sent ultrasound pictures with captions. Your nephew needs his own room. Or, don't you want him to have a happy childhood? Once, a photo of their studio arrived with a depressing view of the cluttered room and the text, do you really want your family to live in conditions like this? I desperately wanted to reply and remind them that they live there completely rent-free, but I restrained the impulse. Any reaction from me would only add fuel to the fire of their persistence. By the end of the week, the calls and messages began to subside. A faint hope flickered in me that they had finally retreated and accepted my decision. How mistaken I was. That Friday, I went to work as usual, but by noon, I felt completely shattered. A fever, a pressing headache, body aches. It felt like I'd been run over by a truck. I told my boss I wasn't feeling well and headed home around 2 p.m. As I approached the house, I immediately sensed something was wrong. Right in front of my garage was a huge truck with the logo, Murphy's Moving Service. My parents' car was parked nearby, as if nothing was wrong. My heart sank and began to beat wildly. What the hell was going on here? I inserted the key into the lock and, stepping over the threshold, froze in stunned disbelief. My parents were inside, methodically packing my things. Mom, on her knees, was wrapping my porcelain plates in newspaper, and Dad was taking books off the shelves and carefully, too carefully, placing them in cardboard boxes. What the hell is going on here? Burst out of me, and my voice sounded deafeningly loud in the ensuing silence. They flinched and froze, like thieves caught red-handed, which wasn't far from the truth. Oh, Jessica, Mom stammered, trying to put on an innocent expression. We thought you were at work. I asked a question, I said through clenched teeth, trying with all my might to maintain my composure. What are you doing in my house? We're just helping you move, she justified herself, as if there were nothing reprehensible about it. Jake and Sarah are moving in here today, and you're moving into their studio. I've told you dozens of times that I'm not going to do that. My voice broke, filling with anger and pain. Dozens of times! We all agreed that you have no need for so much space, Dad said. Not taking his eyes off the books, he continued to methodically pack into the box. It's unfair for one person to have empty rooms, while a young family with a child is crammed into a little cage. I am absolutely not interested in what agreement you came to, I hissed through clenched teeth, feeling a tremor seize my whole body. This is my house. They demonstratively continued their task, as if my presence were nothing more than a nuisance. Mom, with feigned diligence, carefully folded my cashmere sweater and placed it in a cardboard tomb. Dad, with an impassive look, was wrapping a photo frame containing a picture of when we were all once happy in bubble wrap. Stop, I demanded, and for the first time, my voice rang with steel. Stop touching my things immediately. Jessica, don't be dramatic, Mom brushed me off, not looking at me. You're only making things more complicated. In that moment, something inside me snapped. Without saying another word, I turned around and went up to my bedroom, locking the door behind me. With trembling fingers, I dialed the police. "I want to report a break-in," I said, looking at the wall and trying to speak clearly. "People have entered my house without my permission and are packing my personal belongings." "Are you in immediate danger?" the dispatcher asked. "No, but they are committing theft and refuse to leave the premises. A patrol car is on its way to you." The police arrived within 5 minutes. 2 officers listened to my explanation on the doorstep. My parents immediately tried to present things in a different light. "Officer, we are her parents," Dad began with a strange smile. "We're just helping our daughter move. A small family misunderstanding." "Miss, did you give them permission to be here and handle your property?" the senior officer asked me. "Absolutely not," I replied firmly. "I have repeatedly and unequivocally told them that I have no intention of moving anywhere and have given no such instructions." The officers exchanged telling glances, and then their attention shifted back to my parents. "Sir, ma'am, please come with us." "This is outrageous," Mom shrieked, her face contorted with a grimace of anger. "She's our daughter. We have rights." "Being related does not grant you the right to enter someone else's home and handle their property against the owner's will," the second officer retorted impassively. Mom started screaming, and Dad, enraged, made a sharp lunge towards the officers. A quick, sharp reaction followed. I stood, numb, and watched as my parents, their movements restrained, were led out of my living room. The movers stood clustered in the hallway in awkward silence. What should we do with the stuff?" one of them asked timidly. "Unpack everything. Put it back exactly where it was, down to the millimeter," I instructed, feeling an icy calm. "And send the bill for your services to the people who hired you." When the house was finally empty, I sank onto a kitchen chair, trying to process what had happened. My own parents had attempted a break-in and taken the law into their own hands. They truly believed they could dictate my fate as they saw fit, simply because it seemed fair to them. 2 hours later, the phone rang. Mom's number was on the screen. She was apparently calling from the station. "Jessica, you must drop these absurd charges." Her voice trembled with rage and humiliation. "We are your parents. We only wanted what's best for you." "No." My voice sounded flat and lifeless. "I've had enough. I'm done with all of you." "You can't be this heartless," she almost wailed. "I am absolutely serious," I replied, and ended the call. The next morning, I went to the police station and formally confirmed my charges. Let my parents deal with the consequences of their own illegal actions. I had finally ceased to be the doormat they were so used to wiping their feet on. My parents posted bail that same evening and were released. This fact didn't surprise me. They always had funds, and they had no criminal record. What truly astonished me was something else. They didn't immediately attempt to contact me. I mentally prepared for a barrage of furious calls, new humiliating accusations. Instead, the next morning, I got a call from my grandmother. Her voice, usually so warm and velvety, sounded tired and tense. "Sweetheart, your parents are terribly upset," she began, and her intonation held genuine distress. "They just can't comprehend that you actually went through with having them arrested." "They broke in, Grandma," I replied coldly, feeling anger boil within me. "They were packing my personal belongings without asking my permission, like thieves in their own daughter's house." I know," she sighed. And in that sigh, I heard the full weight of the family discord. And I told them straight out that you were absolutely right to defend your home. But calling the police on your own parents? That, sweetheart, is a very serious step. What was I supposed to do? My voice trembled with indignation. Politely ask them to stop stealing my things? Serve them tea and cookies while they ransack my home? I don't know, Grandma said helplessly. This whole story is a complete nightmare. But you mustn't let it destroy our family. Sever all ties. I didn't destroy anything, I cut her off, feeling an icy emptiness inside. They did it themselves, with their own hands. Grandma sighed heavily. Maybe you're right, but they are still your parents. Are they? I gave a bitter laugh. Because real parents are supposed to love and support their children. and these people see me only as a resource to be used with impunity. After that conversation with Grandma, a ringing silence set in, stretching for 3 long days. And this silence was surprisingly blissful. No venomous calls, no manipulative messages, no demands to hand over my house. Only long-awaited peace and quiet, in which I began to recover. But then the mailman brought an envelope. It was from my mother, written in her calligraphic handwriting on monogrammed stationery. "Jessica," the letter read, "after much reflection and a family council with your father and brother, we have decided to disown you. You are no longer our daughter. Your selfish actions have clearly demonstrated that family means absolutely nothing to you. You chose a house over your own flesh and blood. We no longer wish to maintain contact with you and ask that you leave us alone." Instead of the usual, "With love, Mom," the signature read, "Your former mother." I read the message twice, then slowly lowered it onto the kitchen table. I listened to myself, expecting to be overwhelmed by a wave of grief, resentment, or rage. But the only feeling that filled every cell of my being was all-consuming, deafening relief. They undoubtedly believed this letter would crush me, break my will. They probably imagined me sobbing, begging for their forgiveness, agreeing to any terms. But all I felt was a long-awaited, hard-won freedom. I was finally free from their constant criticism, endless demands, their suffocating manipulations. I calmly brewed myself a cup of coffee and settled in the living room, surveying my beautiful, quiet abode. My house. The house I earned through 13 years of relentless labor. The house I almost lost because of their insatiable greed and pathological belief in their own rightness. The following few weeks were the most serene I had experienced in many years, filled with an unfamiliar, almost tangible silence in which I could finally hear myself. I immersed myself in the familiar rhythm of work, returning in the evenings to my serene home where I could do whatever I wished without regard for anyone else's opinion. I no longer had to torment myself with thoughts of Sunday dinners, exhausting family dramas, or humiliating accusations of selfishness just for daring to live my own life, not someone else's. From Grandma, during our rare but warm phone conversations, I learned that Jake and Sarah were still crammed into the studio. "Managing, somehow," she reported with a slight note of sadness in her voice. "The birth is in a few months, so they're making do as best they can." To my cautious question about our parents, Grandma sighed. "They are thinking of selling both their house and the studio. They want to use the proceeds for 2 apartments, one for themselves, one for Jake and Sarah." "They could have done that from the very beginning," I remarked coldly, "instead of trying to take my house." "I think they just hope to take advantage of your kindness," Grandma said quietly. "They didn't expect you to fight back." "Well, they were terribly mistaken," I replied, and not a single sound in my voice wavered. Later, rumors reached me that my parents had been hatching this insidious plan for many months, methodically convincing themselves of their own righteousness. They had convinced themselves that I didn't deserve my house because I was single and childless. They had relied on my perceived softness and desperate desire to preserve the family at any cost. How mistaken they were. Wrong about the most important thing. The irony was that they could have simply asked me to help acquire housing for Jake and Sarah, approached me as reasonable, loving people, explained the situation, and asked for a loan or even a gift, and I, always generous to family, might have considered such a possibility. But they didn't want to ask. They desired to take what, in their minds, I had no right to. They wanted to punish me for my success and independence, for daring to build a life without their approval. 6 months later, news reached me that they had indeed carried out their backup plan, sold both properties, and purchased 2 modest apartments, a 2-bedroom for Jake and Sarah, and a condominium for themselves. Everyone was reportedly satisfied with the new housing arrangement, having acquired the desired comfort without my involvement. And I was happy too. I still lived in my beautiful house, earned and deserved. I had my career and my independence, and I no longer had to deal with people who thought I owed them everything I had achieved. Sometimes a slight sadness for the idea of family washes over me, for the ghostly memories of Sunday dinners and holiday gatherings. but I do not miss the constant criticism, the suffocating manipulations, the oppressive feeling that everything I do is never good enough. My life is now quiet, measured, and absolutely my own. I am the master of my own destiny. I manage my own resources, and I live in my own space where no one dares to call me selfish for my successes and demand that I hand over my hard-earned possessions to those who put not the slightest effort into acquiring them. Through this painful story, I learned a harsh but valuable lesson. Sometimes those who swear love the loudest are only dragging you down. And sometimes the kindest thing you can do for yourself is to unhesitatingly cut toxic people out of your life. My family thought they were teaching me a lesson by disowning me. They expected me to crawl back, begging for forgiveness and offering my house as ransom. But instead, they taught me that I am stronger than I could have imagined, that I don't need their approval to be happy, and that choosing oneself is not an act of selfishness, but a vital necessity dictated by the instinct of self-preservation.